In the year 1830, Ahmad Musawi, a prominent Shia scholar from Lucknow in India, decided to leave his homeland, resentful of the oppressive British rule in India. He embarked on a journey that led him to Iran, ultimately settling in the village of Khomeini. 72 years later, in September of 1902, the family welcomed Ahmad Musawi's grandson, Ruhollah, who would have a massive impact on the destiny of Iran from the last quarter of the 20th century. The grandson, who would be known as Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Hi, you're listening to The Why in History. I am Ajay Kaul, and today we're going to cover the modern history of Iran, starting the 20th century. Politically, Iran's history in the 20th century can be divided into three distinct phases. Phase 1 was under the Qajar dynasty, which lasted up to 1925. But the Qajars had ruled Iran for about 140 years, starting roughly in 1785. The Qajars were followed by the Pahlavis, who ruled Iran from 1925 to 1979. And this was followed by what is often called the Cultural Revolution, which brought the Ayatollahs into power. Towards the end of the 19th century, two world powers, Tsarist Russia and the British Empire, showed increasing interest in Persia, which was Iran at the time, and its surrounding regions. In fact, India's Viceroy, Lord Curzon, remarked, "To me, I confess, they are pieces on a chessboard upon which is being played out a game for the dominion of the world." But the ruling Qajars had shown gross ineptitude and corruption while ruling Persia. They seemed to hire foreign experts very quickly to solve their domestic problems, and this used to irk the locals. For example, to repay Russian loans, the ruling monarch, Muzaffar ad-Din Shah Qajar, hired a Belgian official, Joseph Noz, to reform the customs system. The Qajar Shah was looking to get more revenue via taxation. But in the process, the Belgian disproportionately hurt the local merchants, who were called bazaris, laying the groundwork for a revolt by the merchant community. But at a broader level, the population felt that all these ills existed because of a lack of a constitution. Persia lacked a constitution, and as a result, the monarch was not governed by any laws while executing his daily duties. And this realization happened because of a lot of interaction with the Russians and the British, which gave the Persians an insight into how these countries were governed. And the turning point came in 1905, influenced by the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution of 1905 was instrumental in transforming Tsarist Russia from an autocracy into a constitutional monarchy. And this inspired a series of demonstrations which escalated into strikes demanding a constitution for the country. The ailing Qajar Shah, Muzaffar ad-Din, acquiesced and subsequently, on December 30, 1906, signed a new constitution. The new constitution was drafted by a committee of intellectuals and constitutionalists and was heavily influenced by the Belgian constitution. The new constitution provided a framework for secular legislation, a new judicial code, and a free press. And one of the first outcomes of the new constitution was the constitution of the new parliament, the Majlis. The next 3 years were marked by significant unrest in Persia as the subsequent monarchs tried to cancel the constitution. The Persians rose once again, and in July of 1909, the reigning Qajar monarch, Muhammad Ali Shah, was forced to abdicate. His son, Ahmad Shah, who was only 11 years old at that time, became the new monarch, and he would end up being the last ruler of the Qajar dynasty. So upon ascending the throne, under pressure from the general public, Ahmed Shah reinstated the constitution, and the second parliament convened, formally reinstating the constitution. So on the domestic front, the Persians had a constitution. But on the international front, Russia and Great Britain were busy dividing the Persian territory between themselves. Whoa, wait. Dividing Persian territory? Was Persia getting colonized? Sort of. Following the Anglo-Russian Convention of 1907, Russia and Great Britain signed the Anglo-Russian Agreement, finalizing their sphere of influence within Persia based on their respective interests. The northern part of Persia, that included the capital Tehran, was designated the Russian sphere of influence. The southeastern region was designated the British sphere of influence, and in between was the neutral zone where none of the two were supposed to have any influence. Persia was not part of these discussions, and technically it was reduced to a semi-colonial status. So what did sphere of influence actually mean? Well, it was a combination of military and economic dominance. Russia kind of maintained some amount of military control over the northern region, even collecting local taxes. It supported the Qajar monarch against any revolutions, and Russia controlled the loan and discount bank of Persia and held monopolies on railways, fisheries, and manufacturing exports. Great Britain focused on securing the oil reserves while maintaining control of the economy through the Imperial Bank of Persia. Initially, they supported the constitutional revolution, but gradually aligned more with Russia after 1907, and because of that, a lot of Persians overall felt betrayed by the British. Against this backdrop, World War I happened. And towards the later part of World War I, in Russia, the Bolshevik Revolution happened. And once the Bolsheviks came to power in 1917, they abandoned the Russian sphere of influence in northern Persia. That meant they had left Persia fully open to the British. And the British jumped on this opportunity. In 1919, championed by the British Foreign Secretary Lord Curzon, the Anglo-Persian Agreement was signed, virtually making Persia a protectorate of Great Britain. Per the agreement, which was signed with Persian Prime Minister Vasuk-ud-Dowleh, Great Britain would gain full control over Persia's military and financial administration. There was a massive outcry against this agreement across Persia, with people saying that Persia had virtually given up its sovereignty to the British. So it never got ratified by the Majlis, and it was formally abrogated in 1921. The British were not happy about that. They felt that the Qajar monarch, Ahmed Shah, was too young, inexperienced, and incompetent, and he needed to be replaced by a strong military leader. And the military officer was identified as the Reza Khan, an officer in the Persian Cossack Brigade. Now, one of the reasons the British picked up Reza Khan was that he had clearly indicated that he did not appreciate a Russian presence in Persia. So they were sure that after the British military left Persia, there was a little chance that Russia would once again gain control over Persia. So the British military commander in Persia at that time, General Edmund Ironside, supported Reza Khan in conducting what is now called the 1921 Persian coup, primarily to install a strong centralized and pro-British military leadership. But in doing so, Reza Khan was clearly instructed by the British not to topple the Qajar monarch Ahmad Shah. Wait, then what was the coup all about? So on February 22, 1921, Reza Khan and his forces marched towards the capital Tehran and occupied the city, seizing control of police stations, ministries, and government offices. The Majlis was dissolved. Ahmad Shah was still allowed to continue in power, but he was pressured to appoint Sayyid Ziauddin Tabatabai as the new prime minister. And Reza Khan himself took over the position of Minister of War. So the coup essentially entailed replacing the government with one that was under Reza Khan's control while retaining Ahmad Shah as a mere figurehead. And retaining Ahmad Shah as the monarch was important after the failure of the 1919 Anglo-Persian agreement, where Persia viewed Great Britain as interfering in Persian affairs. So from 1921 onwards, Reza Khan continued to consolidate his power, turning prime minister in 1923. By this time, it was amply clear that Reza Khan held the reins of power in Persia, and the figurative Qajar monarch, Ahmad Shah, fled to Europe fearing for his life. Now, around this time, post the fall of the Ottomans in Turkey, Kemal Ataturk had declared Turkey a republic and become its first president. Reza Khan was planning on doing the same in Persia, declaring Persia a republic and becoming its first president. But the Persian clergy vehemently opposed this idea. Why? Because subsequent to becoming president, Ataturk had abolished the clergy in Turkey and secularized the nation. And the Persian clergy was worried that they would face the same fate. The Persian clergy preferred that Persia stay a monarchy and Reza Khan become its new monarch, rather than convert it to a republic with Reza Khan as the president. So on October 31st, 1925, the Majlis formally deposed Ahmad Shah while he was in exile, making him the last Qajar monarch. In April of 1926, Reza Khan was formally crowned Reza Shah Pahlavi, starting the Pahlavi dynasty in Persia. Now, despite being a Muslim himself, Reza Shah Pahlavi viewed the excessive influence of the Islamic clergy and certain religious practices as impediments to progress and national unity. So he tried to bring the nation together, invoking the glory of pre-Islamic Persia, starting with assuming the last name Pahlavi, which was actually a script during the pre-Islamic Sasanian Empire in Persia. And this was followed with changing the name of Persia to Iran in 1935. Reza Shah Pahlavi felt that Iran, or the land of the Aryans, reflected true identity of the nation and was more inclusive rather than Persia, which referred specifically to the Pars region. Reza Shah Pahlavi ruled for 16 years from 1925 to 1941. He was able to modernize and secularize Iran, but at the same time, he turned very authoritarian. The key highlights of his reign were the rapid industrialization, infrastructure development, legal reform, and restriction of the influence of the clergy. The signature infrastructure development piece of his reign was the Trans-Iranian Railway, which was completed in 1938. The Trans-Iranian Railway was a 1,400-kilometer north-south line connecting the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf. With respect to empowerment of women, several reforms were initiated by Reza Shah Pahlavi. In 1936, the government banned the wearing of the chador and veil in public. This gave women a more prominent presence in public, but it led to some resistance from the conservative religious communities. Enrollment of girls in elementary schools rose sharply to 47,000 by 1936, and women were formally admitted to Tehran University in 1935. Subsequently, women were encouraged to enter the workforce, and public co-educational schools were introduced to desegregate the society. Interestingly, to homogenize Iranian society, Reza Shah Pahlavi introduced various hats to replace the traditional headgear, which many times highlighted the differences in Iranian society. So the turbans and other traditional headgear were first replaced by the Pahlavi hat, which resembled a French military hat between 1927 and 1935. And in 1935, the Pahlavi hat was replaced by the fedora, which appeared more Western. While all these changes were very transformational, they were done in a very authoritarian way. And gradually, Reza Shah Pahlavi got rid of even his closest advisors. Abdul Hussein Temurtash, his most capable strategist, fell from favor and was arrested and died in prison under suspicious circumstances. Ali Akbar Dawar, the architect of Iran's modern judiciary, took his own life after a harsh scolding from the Shah and the arrest of his closest allies. Bereft of his smartest advisors, Reza Shah Pahlavi committed a huge blunder at the start of World War II, which would end his reign. Iran decided to stay neutral at the start of World War II. And the primary reason for this was that Reza Shah Pahlavi, over the course of his reign, had built a strong economic partnership with Germany to keep the colonial powers, United Kingdom and Russia, at bay. But when Germany invaded the Soviet Union, the Allies realized that Iran was positioned very strategically to achieve success on the battlefront. Two factors were in play here. One, the British needed Iran for physical control over oil, which was supercritical for success during World War II. And second, Iran was a vital land corridor to the Soviet Union because the alternate route was frozen most of the year. Ironically, Reza Shah Pahlavi's crown jewel, the Trans-Iranian Railway, was a key factor in this land corridor to the Soviet Union. And because Reza Shah Pahlavi was staying neutral, the Allies collectively agreed that he had to be removed from power. So on August 25, 1941, the United Kingdom, along with the Soviet Union, invaded Iran under Operation Countenance. The British troops attacked from the west and the south, while the Soviets entered from the north. The resistance from the Iranian army was able to last just 3 days. Why? Because, and this is true even today, the Iranian army was trained and equipped to deal with internal opposition rather than foreign invasion. And the Iranians in general did not mind the invasion at all because they viewed Reza Shah Pahlavi as an Oriental despot who was a Cossack trained by the Tsarists and brought to power by the British imperialists. Cornered and isolated, Reza Shah Pahlavi glanced into the past looking for someone who he could take advice from. And he suddenly remembered his first Prime Minister, Muhammad Ali Faruqi, who was still alive. So on August 27, 1941, Muhammad Ali Faruqi was once again appointed Prime Minister, but this time specifically to negotiate a peaceful settlement with the invading armies. Many proposals were laid on the table by the British and the Soviets, and these included reinstatement of the Qajar monarchy, converting Iran into a republic. But the one that Faruqi pushed for and was able to get an agreement was the installation of the Crown Prince Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi as the new monarch. For Faruqi, this would ensure continuity with respect to Iranian governance and a new monarch who would be more allied with the Allied powers. So on September 16, 1941, Reza Shah Pahlavi signed his abdication, and his son, Muhammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, was sworn in as the new monarch before the Majlis at the age of 21. Meanwhile, the Iranian clergy had found a new voice in the Shia scholar and teacher Ruhollah Khomeini, who was producing numerous writings on Islamic philosophy, law, and ethics. Writings that were gradually building a huge following for him in Iran. But this journey of his will be covered in more detail in the next episode. So it is here that we end this section of the program. On to the quiz section. Question from the previous episode. What changes directed at energy savings were implemented across the US to combat the 1973 oil crisis? Several changes were implemented to combat the 1973 oil crisis within the US. But among the options provided, only A and B are accurate. That is, the national speed limit was reduced to 55 miles per hour, and a year-round daylight savings time was implemented. Question for the current episode. Why did Winston Churchill continue to call Iran Persia during World War II? Was it A, because he refused to recognize the new name? B, the British bureaucracy was running behind with respect to updating the paperwork to reflect the new name? C, he felt Persia would remind the world of Western influence over Iran? Or D, since Iran sounded very much like its neighbor Iraq, he did not want any confusion in military orders during World War II. Once again, why did Winston Churchill continue to call Iran Persia during World War II? Was it A, he refused to recognize the new name? B, the British bureaucracy was running behind with respect to updating the paperwork to reflect the new name? C, he felt Persia would remind the world of Western influence over Iran? Or D, since Iran sounded more like its neighbor Iraq, he did not want any confusion in military orders during World War II? The answer will be provided in the next episode. That's all we have in the current episode. As stated earlier, in the next episode, we continue our look into the history of Iran, starting with the new monarchy of the 21-year-old Muhammad Reza Shah Pahlavi. Till then, stay safe, but keep exploring the why in history.